You know, when I created the off the book segment, I thought it would be something fun to do to kind of break up the monotony. And I don't know if fun is the word that I would use for this, because when I started putting together this list of my 10 favorite video games ever, all I did is I got out a pen and paper and I started writing down games that I knew that I loved, just straight off of memory. And I was at about 50 games and I was like, oh no. Hey, what's up, bookworms and gamers? Mike back to talk a little more off the books, and today we're going to be getting into my 10 favorite video games of all time. Now, before we do that, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of background here, in case it's the first time you found the channel. I know sometimes when you do a new topic like this, you're going to find some new viewers. Yes, I do focus just on book reviews here, but every once in a while I like to do a segment called Off the Books, where it's fun to talk about some other media I like, just to kind of show that there are more things I'm into besides reading, and video games is obviously a big one. I've been a gamer since I can remember. Look, I am 42 years old now, and my first console was the Atari 2600. You guys remember paddles? Those were such cool controllers. So yeah, you're probably going to see some stuff on this list you might be like, what? So if you're looking for just like Call of Duty 4 and stuff like that, stuff that you have heard of in the last decade, you might find some of that, but you're not going to find just that. So just kind of preparing you there. Look, I am a single player campaign guy. Maybe couch co-op if that's an option. Play with my kids, play with my wife, things like that. I don't do the online gaming. I don't do the PvP, the 1 versus 1. I don't do the battle royale. I don't do MMORPG. So that's why these aren't on the list, because I know you have a lot of people being like, hey, what about Destiny? Hey, what about, whatever, Fortnite, stuff like that. That my kid plays that, that's fine. I'm glad that he likes it. Me, I need a single-player, story-driven kind of game, unless, like I said, I'm doing couch co-op Halo with my wife or my son or something like that. That's when I kind of get into that stuff. Now, I do have a couple of rules for this, and there's a reason for this. My rule is 1 game per franchise, because look, guys, my favorite gaming franchise of all time is The Legend of Zelda, and if you let me put as many Zelda games on here as I like, I'd say probably 4, maybe 5 of them would be Zelda games. So I'm trying not to do that, to kind of mix things up a little bit. But yes, 1 game per franchise, so you will not see multiple of anything on here. Look, this is incredibly hard to do because like I said, there are so many games that I played over the years. I'm not a brand loyalist. A lot of people that are like, I can only buy Sony system, or I can only buy Nintendo systems. No, I'm all about, as a consumer, I want all the good stuff, and competition's good. And when these companies are competing, the consumer wins. So I'm definitely not going to be doing any of that stuff. So when I mention where I played the game, I don't care if you're like mad because I played it on Xbox instead of a PlayStation, or you're mad that I played the PC version instead of the Nintendo version, or something like that. You get what I mean? I'm just listing the version that I played it on, and sometimes the reasoning for that, sometimes that was the better deal, or sometimes I wanted to play with a friend or something like that, and that was the console that they had it on. That kind of influenced my decision. So got that out of the way. This is so hard that if this video gets a lot of good traffic and a lot of good discussion, I'll kind of revisit this and maybe do it like by console or by gaming generation, because just doing 10 overall, when, like I said, I started with the Atari, this was difficult. This was very, very difficult. And I know I'm going to feel sick about this as soon as this video's over. Okay, so with all that said and done, now let's get into the countdown. I'm just doing 10 here with an honorable mention. The honorable mention I want to talk about, and this is a game I only played on PC. It is called Subnautica. And the reason I'm not including it in the top 10 is because I still feel like maybe it's just a little too new. I've played it 3 times. That's how much I love it. I think what I liked about the game is I love a good survival game, but I'm also one of those people who suffer from something called thalassophobia, which is fear of open space, mainly the ocean. So to me, it became a survival horror game. So many times you're diving into these dark depths and you hear these noises behind you, and you are actually terrified as a gamer to make your character turn around and look at what's following you. It's a really, really just a game so full of ambiance that I think that anyone can enjoy it, but people who are really into discovery, a game that doesn't hold your hand, it does not tell you where to go. I mean, this game is just like, hey, here, your sub just crashed, and now you're in this giant wide open space. Not only do you have to learn how to survive, you got to figure out where to go, what to do. And I think what the game creators said with that game is every time you don't know what to do, just dive and see what happens. So it's a game that really just has endless replay value because you can build a base, you can explore every little inch of this massive, massive ocean, and yeah, it goes deep underwater. But it's a really cool game that I know for sure will crack into my top 10 eventually. But I wasn't ready to knock any of these off yet, and let's get into those 10. First up, number 10 is my first case of not being able to pick one from one franchise easily. I'm talking about the Final Fantasy franchise, and this was tough because I started with the very first Final Fantasy on the original Nintendo. Played them all up until about, I think, 11 or 12. That's kind of when I fell off of the train. But obviously it's a franchise I have many, many fond memories of, and picking just one was the toughest. And I know everybody thinks I'm going to go with 7, but I'm actually going to go with 6, and that was Final Fantasy 3 in the United States. But Final Fantasy 6, I think I just love that story so much. You had this large cast of characters, and I fell in love with all of them. I thought Kefka was just like such an underrated villain for that series. General Leo had one of the most epic scenes in all of a Final Fantasy game. I think it was when Super Nintendo and Squaresoft were just like peanut butter and jelly at that time. Like, they could not miss. Anything those two did together was just magic. And I think it's one of my favorite magic systems in all of Final Fantasy with the Espers. I thought it was such a neat idea. All kinds of different things in there, but each character felt so different. They all had a backstory. It was like it took everything that was great about Final Fantasy 2 and it just made it way bigger and way better. And what I loved about that game is it's like when you thought you were done, it like resets and you're like at a floating continent and stuff. It's a deep game that I poured hours of time into. And like I said, I'm not into the whole grinding thing, but I grinded on that game to get all my levels at 99 experience and stuff for every character and stuff. So much free time back in high school, wasn't there? But that is this Final Fantasy game that I would pick for those reasons. Number 9, I'm sticking with the Super Nintendo. I'm sticking with Squaresoft because I remember when this game was about to come out, and I'm talking about Chrono Trigger, and I remember I think it was Electronic Gaming Monthly was a magazine I used to get back then because I didn't believe Nintendo Power anymore. Nintendo Power at that point, everything they put out, it's a 9.5 out of 10, like everything, even the really, really bad stuff. So I thought they were a little too close to their own product to trust them, but I kind of trusted Electronic Gaming Monthly back then. And they said they've done the unthinkable, and they've made a game better than Final Fantasy 3 or 6 or wherever you live. And I was like, there's no way. But I took their word for it, and I pre-ordered Chrono Trigger and was just enthralled. It took everything great about Final Fantasy, and namely in the story, and it made the story so good. I love a good time travel story. It had these combo series that you could do with Chrono and Frog. It was just so many cool little techniques and stuff that they added into the turn-based fighting system. God, guys, it's just so much fun. The soundtrack is superb. I mean, you're talking about MIDI file music here, and they just did such great jobs on it. The character design, everything was kind of an anime look. There's still stuff in that game I haven't figured out. You think in this age of the internet where you can just figure everything out. There's still things in that game I never learned how to do because there was just so much side questing in that game that I had never seen up to that point. But another thing I liked it was you could see the enemies on the screen. It wasn't just random encounters. You could see the enemies on the screen. So if you didn't want to fight them, you could try your best to avoid them. That was like a cool little feature. But again, the story in that, so massive. And the fact that it had like, I think 6 to 18 different endings, depending on choices that you made the replay value just go through the roof. I love that game so much. I would replay it for sure. I'm going to stick with turn-based RPGs here. Yes, that was my bread and butter for a good decade there, from the mid-90s to the mid-2000s. But I'm going to move to the PlayStation 1 now. This game, number 8, is Xenogears, another Squaresoft title. And I think Xenogears was kind of unusual for me because I'm not real big into anime, and it is very clearly based off of Gundam anime, things like that. And the story in that is one of the most incredibly deep and controversial stories that I had ever seen at that point, especially in a video game. There are some themes in that are like, how did they get this game put out, without like an MA rating or something? But it was kind of like a Star Wars in that it started with like episode 4 kind of thing. So you feel like there was all this huge backstory and stuff, and you're learning little bits by little bits. Again, the soundtrack. Dude, I have bought like 4 different versions of the soundtrack. The original game soundtrack, like the piano, like the orchestrated version, all these things. There's a remix album. I think that soundtrack is just phenomenal, and you get some character twists in that with the main character, Faye, that just will completely floor you. It's one of those where I felt like a lot of those games, the translations weren't so good, and that is really good. And all of the twists and turns in that really just completely blew me away. And again, they just continued to make these, even though it was turn-based, they continued to make these fighting systems really, really strong because they would use like combos and things like that. Such a cool game, guys. You can buy it on the the PlayStation Store for like $10. It's worth every cent if you never did. Yeah, sure, the graphics are severely outdated. I mean, the game came out in 1998. So yeah, the graphics are going to be outdated. But if you want substance over style, that was the game of the generation for me. I love that game. I've replayed it so many times because that story just continues to wow me. And it would be higher on this list if the studio didn't get slapped down in the middle of it. You can notice a little different. Like the first disc, this is when they had like the 2 PlayStation discs, and you were like, oh wow, it's gonna be a massive game, right? And the first disc you could sink like 60 hours into, and it's like insert disc 2, and then you have like a character like sitting in a rocking chair telling a story, and you're like, what is this all about? And then you go like to the last fight, like what just happened? And he talks about all these adventures that they had between the end of disc 1 and the last fight on disc 2, and you're like, what happened? And it turned out like the studio, they just ran out of money. They just ran out of budget for it, and they just kind of had to slap it together. So I'd always hoped that they would do like some kind of director's cut or something and fix that up. But again, even with that, still a phenomenal game and just an incredible story with characters that you will just love forever. I love Bart. Bart was so cool. Number 7. This was hard to pick, and I played this on the Xbox 360. And I'm talking about Mass Effect 2. I love the first one a ton, but I felt like what 2 increased on was the loyalty missions and, of course, your suicide mission at the end, which had implications for the rest of the series. The loyalty missions in Mass Effect 1, they kind of seem like, I don't want to say chores, but there wasn't anything seriously rewarding about it. Whereas in Mass Effect 2, you were like, this is good stuff. I mean, this is like really quality TV show writing here on some of these loyalty missions, getting to know the other characters in your squad, getting to know their backstories and things like that. But it started introducing more, and it had some in the first one, but more of the decisions that you make are going to affect where the story goes in Mass Effect 3. Now, regardless of how you felt about Mass Effect 3, I know everybody has an opinion about Mass Effect 3. Mass Effect 2 was about as perfect as it gets. And the fact that you could have permadeath for some of your characters because that suicide mission, if you didn't do it right, and that had implications for game number 3. Absolutely amazing. And I think that Mass Effect, I've said before, I think that is the most well-crafted, well-imagined science fiction universe outside of Star Wars. I think if you ever want to adapt a television series of a video game that I think could be really, really good, Mass Effect, because that world is so deep. It's so imaginative in a way that even some of my favorite science fiction shows never hit. So different species, different cultures, everything about it was just so amazing. And I think I really kind of felt like it was like what Babylon 5. It took a lot of ideas that Babylon 5 had, and it just really, really expanded on those. So there, check out my sci-fi off the books if you want to know more about Babylon 5. But Mass Effect 2 would play again. Number 6, I played it on both the Xbox One and on PC on a replay, and that is Witcher 3: The Wild Hunt. This is considered by many to be the game of the last generation, and I wouldn't argue too hard. I mean, it's a spectacular game. And it's amazing that it has like one of the worst, like all-time bad jumping controls in a game I've ever seen. But the absolute depth to that game was astounding. There is so much to do. Like I said, I think I sunk 300 hours on the Xbox One, about 200 on the PC, and I still haven't done nearly everything. I finished the first expansion, but I haven't finished, was it Blood and Wine? I think I didn't finish that one on either, just because there's so much stuff to do. And I love that, guys. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I get bogged down by the, look, what I was to turn-based RPGs back then, I am to open world gaming now. Now, if it starts becoming fetch quests, this is why I tried Elder Scrolls Online. It was just fetch quests over and over again. That's not for me, guys. If it starts feeling fetch questy, yeah, again, that's why I didn't like Outer Worlds. But all of the side quests felt as good as the main game, the main story, and that's very, very impressive. And it led me to reading the books, so that's another positive to it. But what can I say about the Wild Hunt that hasn't already been said? I mean, it's a spectacular game. Made me go back and play Witcher 2. Witcher 1, I watched like a movie. Someone made like a movie version of it on YouTube, and it was pretty cool. But just seeing how they took everything that Andrzej Sapkowski just kind of created with that world and kind of expanded on it, so neat. And there's a lot of people. I'm only about 3 books in, and I'm kind of leaning that way too. That they like the games better than the books, so the storyline. So there's that, but a spectacular storyline. I love all the side characters. All the side quests are really good. And like I said, it's just like the replay value is intense because there's so much to do. I don't know if you'll ever get to a replay. The only reason I did is because I got a big old gaming PC, and I was like, look, that's like my favorite game of this generation. I'd love to play that again with these beautiful graphics on this PC, right? So that's why I did it. But yeah, I'm going to be playing that one for years still because I'm not nowhere near done with it. Let's reel the clock back a little bit. This is my only original Nintendo entry on this list, and at number 5, up, down, down, left, right, BA, select, start. That is 2 players at 30 lives each on Contra. You guys remember the Konami code? Anyone over the age of about 35 remembers the Konami code because it worked on so many. I worked on that. It worked on Gradius. I think one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games I think it worked on. Anything by Konami, it seemed like it worked on there for a while. But Contra, to this day, I just want something quick. I got 20 minutes before I go somewhere, and I just want to have a good time, shoot 'em up. I'll fire that ROM up on my computer and play it again. Play it with my 8-year-old all the time. I've challenged them to be like, hey, let's not do the code. Let's just play it on 3 lives. That's impossible, I've gotten to the last stage on 3 lives, and I've never gotten all the way through. But, life's not over yet, and I'm going to keep trying. But, yeah, it's just the replay value is infinite on that because it never gets old. They've tried to emulate that game so many times. So many other franchises have tried to emulate that game, and they've never been able to capture what they did with that very original Contra game. It's just eternal. It's never going to get old to me. I've probably played it 1,000 times, and I will never, ever get bored of it. So cool. And check out this band called Vomitron. I'll link their music. They do like re-recordings of NES music, but like in heavy metal. And it's so good. The one they do for Contra is just fire, man. I love it so much. Let's keep moving along here. Number 4. This is a PlayStation 1 title. It was very hard for me to pick one game from Castlevania, one of my favorite franchises of all time. But I picked Symphony of the Night from 1998, I think. When I first got a PlayStation 1, it was to get Final Fantasy VII. And at the time, I was kind of almost out of gaming, but Final Fantasy VII, I saw they had a trailer for it at a movie theater. And I was like, whoa, Final Fantasy looks incredible now, right? They got you with those full motion video sequences, didn't they? But I was like, well, I don't want to just get one game. Well, they're still making Castlevania games. Sure, I'll get that too. Castlevania Symphony of the Night is a game that I will replay almost yearly. I love it. I got it on Xbox Live, so I play it on my Xbox One now. It's so much. The whole Metroidvania thing that it and Metroid started is just a theme that I never will get sick of. I think that's what I liked about the Ori games that have come out recently, is the whole Metroidvania thing. You get a new item or a new weapon, it unlocks a new area for you to explore. Lots of backtracking, using a map, things like that. So cool. And I think Symphony of the Night, the idea that you got to play as Alucard, which is the son of Dracula, and that was instead of playing a Belmont, that was a really nice twist, and it changed things up. It kept it fresh. Some of the all-time worst voice acting in a video game, but it's like the prequels from Star Wars. It's like so bad you have to quote it, and you come to love it now. Join me in remaking this world. What is a man? There's so many bad lines in there, but it's glorious. I love it. I don't think I'll ever get sick of some of the coolest. The soundtrack is phenomenal. I own the soundtrack to that as well. And I think just some of the coolest boss fights ever in any Castlevania game. And the fact that they've incorporated some of those into the Netflix Castlevania series, very, very cool. I love that quite a bit. Yes, Symphony of the Night, if you guys haven't played it yet, please find it. I think it's on the, actually on the, is it on the iTunes store now? You can play it on tablet. I haven't got that version yet. Number 3, going back to the Super Nintendo, but sticking with the Metroidvania theme here, Super Metroid. This is a game I play at least once a year because it's just so good. I know I sound like a broken record here talking about the soundtrack, but that music will forever stick in my brain. I love the original Metroid on Nintendo when it came out. What bugged me about it is there was no map and you couldn't save, and it had those ridiculously long passwords. Well, with this, not only could you save your game, but you had a beautiful, glorious map that you could refer to and go back and backtrack and learn all these things, and it would change color if you'd been to that certain area. These are things you don't even think about now, but when that happened, it was a big damn deal. And it really makes me sad that Metroid isn't a more popular franchise. People think, oh yeah, Metroid's a popular franchise, but the reason Nintendo doesn't make a lot of Metroid games is because they don't sell well. It's like you go back and you look at the sales, they do not sell that well. And it's a shame because it's one of the coolest sci-fi gaming series out there. I love the Prime trilogy, is really awesome, and I hope that they talked about making Metroid Prime 4. I think they talked about it at E3 like 5 years ago. And here we are. All we've seen still is a title screen. So that would be something I'd like to borrow my kid's Switch to play. But Super Metroid, again, just such a cool game. I think that the level design is really wicked. The way that they make each biome feel different enough, but it doesn't feel like, well, this is just kind of like, jarring. But so many secrets and stuff in that game. There's people doing speed runs, trying to beat it in under 2 hours, things like that. So many nice little nuggets in there that I still probably haven't figured out, and I've played the game a few hundred times at least, and I find something new every time I play it. So yes, the cream of the Super Nintendo crop. Number 2 might be familiar to most of you because it's on every gaming system known to mankind, and I'm talking about Skyrim. Now, I know a lot of you are being like, oh, come on, it ain't nearly as good as Morrowind. Here's my story with Elder Scrolls. I was not into Bethesda games, like, at all. I loved some open world exploration, but I didn't like first person. I was like, I can't fight first person with a sword. Now, I remember when Morrowind came out, I was actually working at a GameStop back then. Not a GameStop. It was called Electronics Boutique. Do you guys remember them? GameStop purchased them. But I was actually working at a game store there when Morrowind came out, and I was like, okay, that sounds amazing. Yeah, sure, I'll pick it up. And I first started playing it, like I said, not only could I not feel like I couldn't fight with a sword in first person, it was still too weird to me. I mean, you think about it, Halo had only come out like 2 years before that. So the first person craze hadn't really just completely exploded yet. So when I played that game, I felt like Morrowind not only, and this is what a lot of Elder Scrolls fans will rail on you for saying you like Skyrim, is it'll hold your hand. It will tell you where to go. It'll give you a waypoint. It'll tell you how to solve each quest. Whereas Morrowind was like, this is what you gotta do. Figure it out, It's one of those things that I'd love to go back and play it now, but you go back and play it after you've played on the Skyrim engine, and it's rough. It's rough to go back to. It's like people saying GoldenEye is the greatest game ever, but you go back and you play it now, and it's at like 12 frames per second, and it's almost unplayable. That's how I feel about Morrowind. I would love if they would remaster that. And I know there is a independent company out there that is working on doing a complete rebuild of Morrowind, but they've been working on it for like a decade now, and they still have no release date. So I'm not holding my breath about that, but they are doing it in the Skyrim engine, and when that happens, I'll definitely get into it. But with Skyrim, look, there's no game on this list I've spent more hours playing. I played it on 3 different formats here. I played Xbox 360, I played it on Xbox One, the Ultimate Edition, and now I played on PC with and without mods. And when you talk about mods, it just completely makes the game age incredibly well. When the Ultimate Edition came out and they fixed a lot of the problems on PC, first thing you do is you click that button that makes it fix all of the bugs, and it makes it just a great experience. But yet you can highly customize everything. And seriously, I'll play Skyrim now on my PC with mods on, and it looks like a brand new game. It's hard to believe this game's almost a decade. Is it a decade? I think it might be a decade old now. Yeah. Where's Elder Scrolls 6, guys? Anyhow, yeah, it's hard for me to say any game besides this because, like I said, I have sunk well over probably 600, 700 hours into these games. I've done everything. I played as a thief. I played as a warrior. I played as a mage. I love the game. It's aged so well because of mods. So if you haven't done the mods yet, I hope that you will, because it just makes it a completely brand new game. And you want to talk about one of the greatest soundtracks of all time? Right there. I think, is his name Jeremy Soule? I think he's like the John Williams of video games, because his soundtracks for the Elder Scrolls, that was basically what I used for study music while going through school, was Elder Scrolls 3, 4, and 5. So I have those soundtracks memorized. But yeah, Skyrim is just a game that captured my imagination at just the right time. And when they put on mods, it just kind of changed everything. And I got to thank my wife for finally forcing me to play the game. It was a thing where she was playing it because she loved it. But like I said, I was still like, that's not my kind of game. And then I played Fallout 3, and I was like, okay, well, this is really good. So maybe I should try out Skyrim now, and I just fell in love with it. So I played it a little later than everyone else, but I think I played it just as much as everyone else at this point. Now, by now, you know that number one is going to be a Zelda game, right? And the question is going to be, well, which Zelda game is it going to be? This was incredibly hard to choose my favorite Zelda game. I mean, like, the nostalgia side of me wants to be like, look, the original was where it was at. You know, you spent the most time of your life probably playing that original game, because when you were younger and you had a Nintendo and you had no job, and you basically sat at home when you were 8 years old and you played that game, you know, drawing a map, and you just played it until you couldn't even use your eyes anymore, right? But then y'all got to be like, but A Link to the Past took everything that was great about that, gave it the nice new paint job on Super Nintendo, gave it a really solid story, light world, dark world, all those ideas that we've come to know and expect from Zelda now, and made it even better. And then I thought, okay, how about Breath of the Wild? Because that's a game that I did not expect to like as much as I did. But Breath of the Wild was a game where it was like, this is the first one since the very original where they've said, hey, here's a sword, go get him, kid. You know, and don't tell you anything what to do, just drops you into a great wide open world and says, go for it. And, you know, the lack of like dungeons and things like that didn't bother me, because you know what? There was like 140 shrines, which basically made more than 8 little dungeons. So, yeah, so I was leaning towards Breath of the Wild, believe it or not. But I'm going to go with the Ocarina of Time on the N64, guys. Yes. And I think it's because they hyped this game so much. And you think about some of these games that have been hyped. Cyberpunk. You think about Metal Gear Solid 2. All these games that had like all this hype behind it. And you know what? They came out and they always disappointed us. Except Ocarina of Time. Not only did it meet all that hype, it exceeded it in every way. They absolutely pushed the N64 to its limits to make that game. And to this day, it still has the most solid story of any Zelda game, and it tells the whole first meeting of Link and Ganondorf, and the wisdom, the power, the courage of the Triforce, all that stuff that we've come to know and love. It really established the lore right there. Yeah, there's some things that have aged poorly due to it being, you know, polygon based and things like that. I would love a complete rebuild, remastering of this, like they did. I thought they were going to do it when they did the Wii U. They did the Twilight Princess remaster. They did the Wind Waker remaster. I was like, oh my god, they're going to do Ocarina of Time a remaster. They're going to have to rebuild it from the ground up. And I guess they decided that was going to be too much work. But even as is, I know that you can play it on the 3DS, and I think that's been like remastered a little bit, which is just a fresh coat of paint. But yeah, it's a game that just, I couldn't believe that they hit a home run the way that they did. You know, taking the transition into 3D with Zelda, something that the N64 era failed on with many, many different series. They failed with the transition to 3D. You think about that Castlevania game on N64. Oh, God, so bad. Donkey Kong Country. Yeah, but they were able to do it with Zelda and with Mario, of course. And I'm stunned I don't have any Mario on this list, and it's just because this is so hard. This was so hard to make. But guys, I hope that you will understand why I have a good little mix here of different generations, because these were games that were very, very important to me at very different times in my life. And really, this list should be about top 30, top 50, if I was going to be fair to it. So like I said, if this gets enough conversation, enough traffic and things like that, I'll definitely revisit it, because I'd love to go by, you know, like my favorite NES games, my favorite PlayStation 2 games, things like that. I would love to do that. Or just by gaming generation, I would have a blast talking about these things. You see, as I've done this for a half hour, just talking about these 10. But guys, I hope you'll drop in the comments and let me know what your 10 favorites are instead of telling me why mine suck. That's what I would prefer. So there are no wrong opinions here. I hope you guys will drop in the comments and let me know your favorite games of all time, and I will talk to you there.